Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, featuring the sharpest minds in marketing, inspirational case histories, and weekly insights you can apply to your business. Find out why top CMOs rank this podcast among their favorites. Now, here's your host, Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
Hello, Renegade Thinkers. The words of the day are silver lining. It's a term I've been hearing a lot lately, so I looked it up hoping it might somehow be related to my hero, Ben Franklin. But no, John Milton, back in 1634, said something similar about sable clouds having silver linings. The closest Franklin came is the line, "Out of adversity comes opportunity." So yes, this is a time rich with adversity. Many CMOs, and I'm talking to many CMOs right now, are facing budget and staff cuts they've never seen before as revenue drops like they've never seen before. Yet even these folks who are seeing, like I talked to one CMO whose stock went from 42 to 2, another CMO whose full business went to full stop. Even those folks are finding silver linings, and it's inspiring. And I outlined 6 of those silver linings that CMOs have been sharing with me. I'm going to list them quickly and then refer you to where you can find the rest. Separation has brought us closer as people. Suddenly we're seeing empathy in leaders that we have never seen before. Number 2, murky forecasts have increased leadership transparency. Leaders are saying, we don't know, but here's what we're going to do. It's an incredible time. Cessation, as in certain business activities that have stopped, has encouraged actions. And we're going to end up talking about that because I know that's directly relevant to my guest today. Disruption has inspired agility. Lots of new products have been launched in an incredibly short period of time. The 5th one, uncertainty has tuned up plans. Almost everybody has thrown their 2020 playbook that they had planned nicely and that was all set and approved by the board in December or January. Those are out the window, and it's amazing how quickly folks have regrouped. And then the last one is sort of a silver lining, and it's very tactical, is that renegotiating works both ways. When I talk to CMOs, about 30 of them I polled on this subject, and 9 out of 10 said that their contractors, their customers had asked to renegotiate contracts. And what the savvy ones are doing is saying, this is an opportunity to finally get that testimonial that I was looking for, or get an ROI pilot that they weren't willing to do before. So that's another silver lining that's sort of quite interesting to me. Anyway, as I said, I'm not going into the details of these 6 here, but I will link to the newsletter, which is from the show notes on renegade.com, because we need to get to our amazing guest today. Anyway, Holly Rollo. Holly is the Chief Marketing Officer, SVP Transformation at RSA Security. On the off chance you don't know RSA, they have more than 30,000 customers worldwide, including half of the Fortune 500, who rely on RSA to help them manage their digital risk. So first, Holly, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
And just because we're all working remotely, where are you?
I'm actually in our house in South Lake Tahoe.
Okay, that's not a bad place to be. I don't know if you've seen this group, and you may love it. On Facebook, there's a group, From My Window, and it's gone nuts. Have you seen it?
I have seen it. I just joined it, I think, 2 days ago, actually.
Did you share your picture?
Not yet.
I can't wait to see it. It's amazing. If you haven't heard about it, it's people just taking pictures, and they're not all palaces, just of what's going on from their window all over the world. Amazing, brilliant idea. Anyway, let's start with silver linings, since that was where I started this episode. Do you have any personal or professional ones that you sort of can speak to, that things that have happened that sort of you go, wow, that's amazing?
Silver linings. This is a great theme for this podcast, actually, because at least in cybersecurity, I think one silver lining of all of this is there's a lot of vulnerabilities that are taking place and unfolding right now as the attack surface grows with everybody going remote. And I think it if you're in the cybersecurity business, it's a great place to be because, we're continuing to solve problems that kind of come about because of some of these changes that are happening. So, the bad news is there's more threats now than there were, but there's always going to be more threats no matter what, as any kind of digital transformation takes shape, and certainly moving to a remote workforce is one of those. But the good news is there's a lot of great companies and technologies to help solve that problem. So I think that's a silver lining.
So that's really interesting. I mean, I know that everybody suddenly having to work remotely created a major challenge for your organization. And let's go back to, when did you all start to see that this was going to really stress out your customers?
I think we started to see a surge for us probably just in the beginning of March. That's when I would say it sort of unfolded. Everything was sort of current course through February.
Right.
Is what I'm remembering. But the beginning of March, there was just a sudden surge of interest and inbound communication from both customers and non-customers and our partners, to figure out what people needed to do to function, in a lockdown situation.
And so suddenly, all these companies that had these wonderful sort of fortress-like security situations at their offices, not that they weren't still, and they have now their workforce is entirely remote. And I know that created enormous security challenges. Did you all have to create new products on the fly or new solutions, or was it really just taking your technology and applying it in different ways?
No, I mean, our company's been a go-to company for authentication for decades. And, it's sort of the tried and true solution, if you will. So I think just in the speed that everybody was working in terms of setting up their remote workforces, we were just lucky enough to be there to help our customers extend their current licenses and contracts, in addition to just helping get them more, in some cases, hard tokens. We do obviously soft tokens and other things as well. But I think people were really comfortable with what we have, like I said, done over decades, and turned to us immediately. So that's one thing. I think the second thing is, we see it in terms of waves. There was this initial wave to just get everybody set up in some kind of safe and secure way. And I think the second wave everybody's in is trying to assess what that means now in terms of, how much now they've opened up their environment to security risks, number one. And number two, I've seen a change in people's risk appetite. Things that they once wouldn't tolerate, suddenly they, are becoming okay with. And I think some of the video conferencing examples are good ones.
Yeah, it's a fascinating period. I know. I think I read today that Zoom hit 300 million from 10 million like a month ago. I mean, it's just unimaginable growth. And at the same time, there are pushbacks from educational folks, and some cities or governments are saying no, which they're of course trying to address really quickly.
Right.
Now, I did when we talked before, there was some things that you were seeing that you felt, that this whole situation had forced upon you a certain level of agility. And so if we talk a little bit about some of the things that you had this initial wave, now as you're thinking about your business and sort of in this new world, what kinds of things have you seen that or reactions have you guys been taking to sort of go, okay, what now? What do we do now?
Well, I think that is the fundamental question. I think everybody on the planet is trying to figure out, okay, what's next? What comes next? How long does it go on? How do I prepare my business? How do I prepare my infrastructure? Will things fundamentally change, and to what degree? And either in terms of how people work or collaborate, to how people go to concerts and restaurants and do normal things in their life. I think everybody's asking that question, right? So what we are trying to do for our customers is map out, some, like I said, some waves to prepare for. There's certainly the immediate, addressing the immediate crisis, getting up and running, getting your employees up and running, making sure that they can work remotely, assessing, now the vulnerabilities that you've introduced into your environment, understanding what your risk appetite is going forward, because that may have changed. And then how does that change your overall risk strategy for your company and risk management? So, we're trying to help our customers take one thing at a time, instead of trying to address everything at once, because everybody's functioning in crisis mode.
Right.
And even in the marketing that I'm getting, for myself personally, it's overwhelming, just the barrage of information that's just not useful right now. And so our customers we're trying to walk them through, like, worry about this later, worry about this now. Where are you in this? And helping them understand what they need to be focused on.
Interesting. Well, since we have a bunch of marketers here, and usually we don't talk about security much, but I recall that marketing is one of those sources of a lot of security challenges. And I'm just curious, since we have some marketers on there and this new era, what are there any challenges from a security standpoint that marketers should be thinking about right now that they probably weren't thinking about just 3 months ago?
This is a great question and a topic that I am personally so passionate about, and I've been trying to get the word out in the last, I would say, 3 years or so. I've done now 7 marketing transformations through business transformation, and also have the benefit of working in the security industry. And what has happened, and I'll get to the current situation in a minute, but what has happened over the years is there's just explosion of technology that marketers can use. And because marketing is underserved traditionally, it's all delivered via cloud so that we can sort of circumvent IT. And so we consume these cloud technologies, and what we're doing actually is building our own infrastructure in the cloud, right, that a lot of IT teams may not necessarily be paying attention to, because once you get through the security audit, you're off to the races. And they kind of think of them as tools, because we talk about them as tools. We don't talk about them as this whole other integrated infrastructure. So, as you know, all of the bad things happen in the nooks and crannies. And in our case, it's all the APIs and connectors to all these systems. And because marketing people aren't necessarily IT people and aren't necessarily security people, unfortunately, there are ways to leave yourself really vulnerable to security issues and data privacy and governance issues. So in this current situation, it's no different. It's just like going through another digital transformation. Whereas maybe companies were redefining a customer experience, or changing a core business process, or expanding their supply chain in new areas, and introducing third-party risk. This situation is no different. It's just a different type of digital transformation, if you think about it. So, marketing, we need to take a very active role in making sure our organizations understand what risk is associated with adopting some of these technologies. I mentioned, video conferencing, but there are others. And, so it calls out the need for marketing people to really have an understanding of the security threats and the risk that is being introduced into organizations, both because of the digital regulations and also because of the need to have, these technologies integrated into your core systems.
And so if we got really practical, because I hear you, I'm a marketer, I'm thinking about risk, and I know philosophically that every time I add to the stack, I'm adding another API, I'm creating a thing. On the other hand, I got all this technology in the cloud, which meant my whole team could keep working when we had to go remote. So that was pretty cool. So what is a practical thing that a CMO, other than being aware that they're creating risk and, bringing in, I guess, a CISO or whatever when they integrate these things, what could they really do?
Yeah, well, sometimes the problem is, and I'll use this recent video conferencing example, is because it was the recent one. Part of the problem is if we bring in a CISO, they may not fully understand how we're using it and what's happening in a way that exposes the company, because they aren't in the guts of what we're trying to accomplish, right? So you understanding the specifics of where the data gets stored, what the potential vulnerabilities are in the actual practical use case is really important to communicate to the security person. In addition, the security teams may say, well, that's not an actual risk. It's a potential perceived risk. Mm-hmm. But in marketing, we live in a world of perception. We manage perception. And fundamentally, no one even cares about facts anymore, which is disheartening, but it's the truth.
Right.
And so, in some cases, and even we had these recent discussions, is, we created all of these workarounds and manual processes to actually make the applications secure as they can be, right? Because nothing's fully secure. But by using the application itself, because it had security issues, now you've opened up your brand to being affiliated with something that is fundamentally perceived as not being secure. So, this is the challenge, I think, and especially, of course, if you're a security company and risk company. Right. So that's part of the challenge. So I think just being really specific with how you're using the information. And we've seen this in other, when we went through the GDPR wave, when we were all kind of getting back to some of these privacy regulations and data governance, we had to get really specific with our security teams on this, how we were using the data and where the data was going and what we were doing with it. Until we got to that level of detail, they didn't necessarily fully understand why there was a problem. So this communication between the marketing teams and the IT teams and the security teams is just critical to get to that level of detail. And I worry that because these functions are sort of in silos and the marketing people say, oh, well, that's your problem. It's IT's problem or security's problem to make this thing secure. And then the security team just runs it through the security assessment. Doesn't mean that you've addressed the real problems and vulnerabilities.
And what's interesting to me, and as I think about it, what we're really talking about is massive brand risk. I mean, you spend all this time building up your brand and your reputation and trust, and can be destroyed overnight by a data breach connected with your brand. Now, the good news is the American consumer at least seems to be very forgiving. I mean, we've already forgotten about so many big data breaches.
That is true, yeah.
But nonetheless, it's a brand risk, and it needs to be on the CMO's radar screen. Okay, it's a great place to take a break. We'll be right back. Hey, it's Drew, and I wanted to have a quick conversation about turning lemons into lemonade. Here are the lemons: skiing, Park City, January 11th, third day, last run, going fast. Light was bad, a lot of snow on the ground. 50 yards from the bottom, I crashed and burned. Literally tumbling down the mountain, did a 3-point landing with my head and 2 thumbs. Broke the right thumb, sprained the left thumb, finished up surgery 5 days later, and now I have a little extra time on my hands. What do? I finish a special report that I've been dying to finish for a long time, which is a way for me to get to my next book. It's a preview of the book. You can find it on renegade.com. On the very beginning of the homepage at the top, there's a banner that says B2B Special Report. I would love it if you took a look at this and let me know what you thought. I think you're going to find a lot of value in it. Okay, we're back. And Holly Rollo, CMO and SVP Transformation at RSA Security. We've been talking about security. But I want to shift the conversation a little bit because I thought it was really interesting in a prep call. You talked about this was a unique opportunity to build community. And I thought that was enlightened because one of the things that I've been emphasizing to CMOs, particularly for the ones whose business have stopped, is this is a moment where if you had any community, you really need to rally them. And if you don't, you really need to build one and think about how to do it, because you have an opportunity right now to stay engaged and to stay there and to help these people one way or another. And so I'm curious what kinds of things that you guys have done in community.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the analogy I'll use is, if you're doing the stay-at-home order properly, right? You're hunkered down with your family. And what you're doing is you're taking some time to kind of get back to basics. You're maybe playing board games, you're maybe cooking together, maybe you're spending time in a way that you just never found time for or forgot about. The same is true with our customers. Now is a good time to hunker down, really understand, if there's a desire for you to jump in the trenches with them to help address certain challenges they're having in new and creative ways. This is not a time to go on autopilot and just sort of wait until things evaporate and we're kind of all back to normal, because it's going to be some time. So fundamentally, it's a time to really galvanize your relationships with your customers and make sure that you're communicating the best, either in terms of what you're doing to help address the crisis in general as a company. There are lots of big brands doing great things. Or helping your customers address new challenges that they have that they may not have had before, and creating new digital transformation opportunities to help them. Now, of course, I'm in B2B, so I can't speak to consumer specifically, but in B2B, I think there's a lot of really fundamental new ideas and even market opportunities being created. But you won't know about them if you're not in the trenches with your customers, really understanding what they're going through. What we've done is, sorry, go ahead.
No, please tell me what you guys have done.
Yeah. So what we've done is we've really leaned into our community. We have a pretty strong community. We call it RSA Link. And we've leaned into that more. And it's been on the back burner to modernize that experience a little bit for RSA. Certainly something that has been high on the priority list, but in security, a lot of things come and go on the priority list. But now we've elevated that as a core initiative that we're taking on, and also because of the business surge that we've seen in our identity and threat intelligence and threat detection business, is we are finding new ways to link customers to information that they can get quickly and easily versus having to necessarily call and talk to somebody, which, they may not want to do or may want to do, but new ways to get them information that they need to do more with what they have. And, this really creates loyalty and really creates an important customer connection.
A couple of thoughts on that. One was on the phone with a group of CMOs, and we were talking about content that they had created. And one of the CMOs reflected that they had created a ton of non-salesy content that was just really useful and timely, right, and in the moment. And it was the most effective content that they had ever created. And immediately, it's sort of the words that came into my head. It's like, if you want to sell, serve. And exactly. That is this moment, if ever there was a moment. And I know that we talked a little bit about not being tone deaf and but you have products right now that this community needs or could need. And I'm curious is where, if you have at all have any outbound marketing activities going to your community, and how you've found some way to sort of walk that fine line, not being an ambulance chaser, but this is a real issue.
Exactly. So beyond the obvious, identity and authentication solutions, beyond that, we have a fraud action team that looks at types of fraudulent activity going on in the internet and what kind of surges we're seeing. That buyer is for fraud and risk intelligence systems. They're banks and really large institutions that do a lot of e-commerce and transactions online, right? But that fraud action team is seeing things happening and trends happening that they're pulling into, a threat report, for instance, that we can communicate to our threat detection and response customers in the Security Operations Center to help them understand new behavior that's going on online due to COVID, right? Because, a crisis for us is an opportunity for them.
Right.
And if we can, kind of use the information to communicate to our customers on things to pay attention to, I think this is an example of the types of things that we're trying to do.
Right.
In addition to the blueprints that I sort of mapped out on, the waves, what to pay attention to first, and when it's time to get to addressing certain aspects of your security and risk program. So we're just trying to kind of pave the way with the blueprints and then offer useful information so people can direct their attention to the right sets of things right now.
Now, one of the ways brands build community is through events. You were fortunate enough that you were able to get your big community event done before the crisis hit, which is amazing timing and an incredible thing. I'm curious though, knowing that there are probably no physical events of size going to happen in 2020, as nobody wants the liability risk. What have you done from your own event marketing plan to sort of adjust to this new event, physical event absence?
Right, and I have two perspectives. So RSA, the company, we have events for our customers and prospects primarily is called RSA Charge. That's our RSA customer event. RSA also hosts a industry-wide event called RSA Conference, which if you're in the security space or close to it, you've heard of conference. It's been around for decades.
Yep.
RSA Conference was the one you were referring to.
Got it.
Every year we traditionally have 45,000 attendees. It's in San Francisco. It's a huge event. We do a version of that in Singapore in the summer. So that RSA conference event in San Francisco happened, I think mid-February or something, around mid-February. And we were working really closely with, the city and the authorities, and I mean, everything was a green light going into that event. And so, yes, it was able to, be completed that week, but had it been a week later, I don't think we would have had to cancel it.
Yep.
So, so what we're looking at is a couple things. So for our customer event, for RSA Charge, we are still working through, and anybody who's a CMO right now is feeling this pain. A lot of the event vendors are not wanting to renegotiate their contract because they are saying, well, we'll just push it out and keep your money. And events cost a lot of money. So what we really want to do is redirect that funding to do different types of things.
Right.
And so that's super frustrating. And I know I'm not the only one who's dealing with that. And
No,
I wish
you are not.
So we're trying to set that event up in a way where, because we don't know whether we're going to do a hybrid type of event or a purely virtual event or whatnot. So what I have seen companies do, just taking a step back, very quickly, weeks after a lot of the lockdown started to happen, a lot of companies immediately pivoted to virtual events. And what they did, and what a lot of people are doing, and this is not a criticism, it's just an observation, is they're taking a in-person format and they're putting it online, which it's a whole different expectation when you're online, a whole different attention span, a whole different way of consuming information. And so I think everybody's trying to figure out what to do differently because that isn't working really for anybody. So
I want to make sure that I want to put a punctuation point on that.
Yeah.
I was supposed to attend Adobe's big event.
Right.
I was going to record some podcasts there. I was looking forward to being in Vegas. Always fun. Didn't happen. They were one of the brands that rushed to virtual. Now, There was an article in Adweek Adweek that said, here are all the things that, this is from the reporter standpoint, what they learned. And they are showing some pretty good numbers in terms of registrations and so forth. I'm going to share some things that I've heard from other CMOs about this thing right here on this little, put a punctuation point on virtual events. If you approach it the same way, you will not succeed. Let's just be clear on that. And the reason is, no one is going to sit there and watch 8 hours of content. The ideal length, think TED Talk, 20 minutes maximum. Part 2, Q&A. If you really want to get people engaged, it's all about doing a Q&A and figuring out how quickly you can get to that. 3, it's a lot of different staggered formats. So some people are talking about only releasing a certain amount of content every day, for example, so you spread it out. Other people are, and so it's more serialized. There is some sense of people trying to replicate the live, and that, there's this big moment, but that's a real challenge, because if you have a global audience, and we were talking about this, if it's 9 a.m. in New York, it's, 3, and what time is it in Singapore? I mean, it's a problem. So really thinking about this, and I think one of the challenges is a lot of people took their events team, physical events team, and said, okay, you're in virtual. That's part of the problem.
That's right. That is part of the problem, because, let's think about why we do events. Why do we do events? We do events, well, for one thing, it's a huge industry. So there's a lot of pressure to do events because everybody else is doing events, right? Secondly, we do events because they create excitement. And I think for sales teams, they're tangible. They can shake hands and kiss babies. It's something that gets the sales team excited. But that it's very difficult to replicate that, like you were saying, virtually. So let's get back to basics. What are we really trying to do with these events? We're trying to engage people. We're trying to engage people in a conversation. So why do virtual events need to be an event at all? That's why I go back to this community thing. For instance, for RSA conference, our large event, the whole purpose of that event was created to build a community of security professionals that could help drive change and be an input to policy. That has nothing to do with, the bright lights and the glitter and the stage act, right? That has to do with creating meaningful conversations that drive important changes or innovations in the industry. That you can do 24/7. You don't need to do that on a date that's circled in the calendar. And so for RSA conference, we're going through quite a bit of brainstorming to determine how we can create much more engaging, smaller online communities to address particular problems in certain, perhaps verticals, or for certain roles, or for certain, policies. So we're looking more at how to drive that digital community in a very highly segmented way, which you can do now from all this technology through micro-targeting, which is really, I think, what people are yearning for. An example that I gave my team is last weekend, I like to sail, right? And so I'm part of this mailing list and group that gets together every once in a while and talks about sailing things and weather tactics and that sort of thing. And I ended up being on a web conference for 90 minutes on a Saturday. And it was beautiful here where I was. And I was like, why did I spend 90 minutes on my computer on a Saturday when it's gorgeous outside? And it was because it felt so authentic, and what I appreciate, another silver lining I'll mention is now, over video conferencing and the way we're having to collaborate, you can suddenly see people's home offices and kitchens and spare bedrooms and dogs and children. And it feels much more intimate and engaging and more like a personal connection, even more so than you would have on an event show floor when everybody's dressed up, So I think people are really yearning for that connection too, probably also because we're all stuck at home. So I think there's something to learn from that.
And such a good point and a great place to wrap up this section. And I watched a webinar the other day for a nonprofit that I'm involved in, and the guest was I think a professor from Harvard, and the only place he could find to record was from his car.
Yeah.
And so halfway through the thing, the truck started to go back up in the middle of the thing. And it was great. It was charming. And here was this guy, the topic was very, green building. It was a very serious topic, but it's wonderful. And I've heard the same thing from those folks who have done, even in the Adobe case, they did talk about some of those that were recorded where people recorded from their kitchen or did it live from their kitchens or whatever. Those worked because there's an authenticity to it. There's a humanity to it for all the reasons that you said. And it's interesting. So I think that's a great place to wrap up this section, because it's funny, we started with community and sort of ended with community, and we'll be right back. I'm back. I'm not going to talk about skiing, but I do want to talk about the special report that you will find on renegade.com. There is so much meat in this, in the 12 steps to a more effective B2B brand strategy in 2020, that there are probably some folks out there that think I'm crazy to put that out there in front of a firewall. But I'm really hoping to get feedback from some of you all on the report, perhaps what's missing, because again, the book is going to be developed against this outline, but fleshing it out. There might be some guests that could help fill in some of the areas. You may disagree with some of the things. I'm really interested in your opinion on this piece, and your engagement with it will really help make the book that much stronger. So you'll find it on renegade.com. Very top, there's a banner that says 12 steps to a more effective B2B brand strategy. Take a look. So I have several more things that we need to cover, and we're never going to get to all of them. But we did talk about, okay, we don't have physical events anymore, and that was a source of leads. What are you doing with your salespeople who suddenly were used to sort of showing up? That's part one. And part two, I heard this a CMO say the other day to me, you're not going to close a $100,000 sale via a Zoom call. So let's talk about that and what your salespeople are doing and how marketing is supporting them.
Yeah, and this is another silver lining. I think that for years, marketing people have been trying to secretly, or maybe not so secretly, wean salespeople off events, heavy events, right? You know, like I said, they're tangible and in front of their face, and I think they really like them. Without them, it forces them to come into our world, you know, because marketing does a lot of things that salespeople don't even see, right? A lot of the digital and online, you know, it's like, what have you done for me lately? Because I haven't had an event to go to, or a dinner or seminar or a breakfast series. And so it's really forcing them to understand what we're already doing, right? And so in this way, it's not necessarily doing more things, it's helping them understand how to take advantage of a lot of the things that we're already doing on digital, or how we're nurturing some of these leads, or helping them understand some of the analytics. One of the things we've been really trying to get off the ground much more aggressively is this predictive analytics, and helping sales teams understand where to find their white space. And it's been difficult to get their attention on, you know, paying attention to some of these leads coming across and why they're important. And now suddenly we're getting attention on those kinds of programs. So it's accelerated in a lot of ways our overarching, you know, marketing transformation to more digital. And I think that's a really positive thing. Helping them understand the shift to account-based marketing. You know, I've been working on that for the last 18 months, but the sales team is working in this model of the lead waterfall. And we've been trying to shift them to account-based marketing and helping them understand more an engagement-based model. And that has also really helped accelerate us making that change as well. So these are ways that now I think the sales team's leaning in, because they want to hurry up, do something. And we're like, no, we're doing all these things. Right, like, how can you take advantage of all these leads we're giving you that you may not even know about? Yeah.
Explain a little bit more on the, I've had several people on the show on account-based marketing, very familiar with it. And we've had one person from predictive analytics, but what does that really mean? And what are you predicting, or what are you looking at and what are you predicting?
Right. And I'll have to just say a caveat that I think every company does this differently. So, okay. I'm going in with that assumption, but what we are trying to work with the sales teams on is account plans and account strategies. And so by linking our marketing teams to different segments of the market, whether it's regional based or customer segment based, helping them get a handle on, okay, what are the accounts that matter? And maybe they're existing customers to cross-sell and upsell or expand or renew. Or maybe they're new customers, new segments, or new industries they're trying to get into. Name the accounts. And so you have to go through a whole exercise of that white space analysis that, of course, includes, pulling in big data and making sure that the sales teams and the marketing teams are aligned on the segmentation strategy and targeting and relevant messaging. And I think this is where a lot of the friction has historically happened between sales and marketing, because they're not speaking the same language, right?
Right.
And I think so that exercise really forces everybody to be on the same page. And to me, segmentation is key. So during those analytics, if everybody's clear on what accounts are going after, we can get really specific on geo-targeting or door openers, and everybody understands what marketing's role is in the conversation. And how to continue to advance and nurture some of those accounts. So I believe that segmentation is really key to these conversations and gets everybody on the same page, not only in terms of targeting and messaging, but also what kind of analytics you're looking for. So then we can, pull in predictive data from how different accounts are interacting with information online, and understand who's searching for what kind of information or interacting with what kind of information, either your own, your competitors, or even completely alternate solutions. And that's been fascinating for the sales team to have insight into, because they have much more information and they don't look at it anymore. It's just like a plain cold call. They can kind of have a more relevant conversation. So it's been able to really scale up our ability to do lead qualification and kind of get additional information that they can take into a conversation. So this has been really exciting, I think, for them to see happening real time, and exciting for us to finally see, all this hard work pay off.
Well, it's funny as we sort of go circle all the way back to silver lining. One, we haven't really talked about your title of transformation, but if we talk about transforming that community wasn't a priority. Now it is. Getting sales folks on board with all of the future of marketing automation and ABM wasn't a priority for them, but now they're coming in saying, okay. And so It's amazing that in some ways this has been a really good turn of events, if you will. So I think that's interesting. I'm wondering, as we wrap up this show, what you think we've both been doing marketing a long time. And
don't remind me.
Yeah. And we think we've seen it all, and then this hits. And I'm curious, from your standpoint, what's been sort of the biggest surprise or things that you've sort of learned or been reminded of in this particular period with this particular challenge?
Yeah, I think the thing that comes to mind when you ask that question is really around branding. In addition to everything we've talked about, I think sometimes companies get way too formal, and there's a desire to be super professional and polished, and your brand can lose authenticity, And I think in consumer, it's easier to draw outside the lines. It's easier to have humor. It's easier to be engaging. It's easier to be quirky when you're a consumer company. But the same thing applies to B2B and certainly to tech. I think in tech, I've always been frustrated that a lot of brands just want to be, a lot of companies want to present themselves in a way that is just, it just takes the personality completely out of the brand. And so, as I mentioned before, you know, with this desire for people to have authentic engagements, which you've been talking about for years and years, it sort of brings it all back to what's important, which is, you know, people, personalities, you know, quirky attributes, senses of humor, you know, like we're all humans. And I think making sure your brand is just kind of taking this as an opportunity to take another look at about how you're showing up in your voice and in your presentation in the market. It's a great opportunity to do that. The example I'll give is I was watching some television show and a commercial came on, and it was for a big insurance company. And the CEO of the insurance company came on, and he was just, it was a commercial, but he was just talking from his home office with his dog walking by. And he was saying, hey, you know, this has really caused me to think about the current state and what you're going through. And I just want to tell you that we're here for you. And, you know, he had his messages, right? And I thought that was just great because it cost probably zero money to record, you know? Right. And so all these companies spend just like all this crazy money on ads and whatnot. And I think it's just about being earnest and open and human. And so that's one big, I think, aha among the other things that we've already sort of covered. And I definitely have went back to my team and I've said, we have to look at some things and we have to figure out how to be much more open and transparent. And, you know, we thought we were doing a pretty good job, but I think given the current situation and where people's heads are and that need for that human connection, I think it's a great opportunity to look at how you're actually presenting your brand.
Yeah, I think you're right. One person I talked to said, this is the end of slick.
Yep. Exactly. And perfect.
It really, it is in so many ways. And just for fun, I will link in the show notes. I did this on LinkedIn. There's a video. There's a guy named Microsoft Sam on YouTube who put together this compilation video of all these corporate commercials during COVID, and they're all using exactly the same language. It's so painful. We're in this together.
Unprecedented.
Unprecedented. And yes, unprecedented. And it's hilarious. And as someone who writes a lot, I understand that those words just sort of flow because as you start to have a conversation, you sort of want to provide context. And the context for every conversation right now is unprecedented times. Yeah. And so I appreciate the challenges, but man, don't do that. Don't say we're all in together.
Yeah, this actually even goes back to the risk appetite conversation, because why do we do that? You know, why do marketers feel the need to kind of strip out that stuff? It's because over time, more and more of our legal department has gotten involved in some of the, reviews of whatever it is, right? And, there's a risk to everything. And so I think we've taken those more and more on. And I think now, if you lower your risk appetite for things like this, even just in your voice, and it really opens the doors. And so I think as marketers, we need to also push back and go back to basics when it comes to branding. And, just back to your point also about us being in this for decades. I mean, 20 years ago and maybe it was longer than that, when video started to be used in marketing, it was grainy and it was terrible. And, it was like the head of engineering geeking out on his stuff, right. And people love that stuff. People love that stuff. So I think we need to get back to that.
Yeah,
sure.
I totally agree. And as a silver lining, this sort of really reminds us of a few things. One, keep it real. I mean, slick is dead, keep it real. That doesn't mean it you can get away with boring. It doesn't mean you can be, there's a difference between being empathetic and real and boring, and thus the need for shorter content and so forth, and not taking your main stage presentation and doing all the slick productions. So, okay. We've covered so much ground. And as I think about this, I want to try to tie everything up. This is a moment for CMO leadership like I've never seen before. And I've did an entire episode on that, but you really helped me sort of feel it in this show, because it's about getting your organization headed in a direction that everybody can speak to in a very human way. Okay, I'm not even going to try to do any more because we've already gone on long. But Holly, I want to thank you so much for spending time with us. It's really been an interesting discovery journey with you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Drew.
Hey, my pleasure. And to the listeners, thanks for hanging in. As always, keep those renegade thinking caps on and strong.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.